Okay, so in this video, I'm going to just quickly show you how you need to export audio files so that you can share them with your fellow group members and collaborate without getting things sort of out of sync and all of that. So here we have a set with a bunch of things in it, but we've got a guide track up the top here. And so we know that that's the length that we kind of want to export to and that everyone else is going to be working to. So here I've got a bass take that has just been sort of bounced from MIDI, so it's pretty sort of rudimentary. You can hear that going on there. So there's a couple of things. What I want to make sure is that when I export this, perhaps I want to label this track as the bass guitar. So what I would do is like I can sort of go Command R and then call it bass guitar. So that's fine. Now you can see that the length of this one up here, the guide track, is actually a different length to what I've recorded on the bass. I've recorded a little bit longer on the bass there. So there's a problem that could happen here. If I selected that whole track that I've just recorded and then I go to export, I could select master, but I really just want to select the bass guitar track because that's all I want to export at this point. So I could select bass guitar there. Now, because I've selected that, it's going to export the length of the bass guitar that I've just recorded, but that's actually longer than the guide track. So that's a problem because if I then share that with someone who's working to the guide track, there's a very small possibility that it could get out of sync because they're different lengths. So it's like you're not sure if they start together or if they start so that they both end at the same time. So that's a fairly simple solution that's most people will be able to work out, but it can get a little bit more complicated than that. So what you really want to do is there's a couple of ways you can do this. One is you can select the guide track, and that's highlighted. Now if I do it this way, let's say for example if I zoom in on this guide track. Now this guide track is exactly a certain number of bars, so that's fine. But if it was say like just slightly off, like not really to the grid, it's still going to be clicked to the grid at the moment, but say if it was like slightly under 98 bars there, then it would be very easy to sort of think, oh yeah, it's 98 bars. But to avoid that though, what I would do is I would sort of select that, and it's only going to select the exact length of that wave. Okay. And then so I could select that, and actually I'm going to go back and expand that so it's full length. So select the guide track, and then that's the length of the selection. Then I go to File, go to Export, select bass guitar. It was still selected, and then it'll export the bass guitar. So let's see, I'll do this now so you can see it. So I'll export this just to the I'm going to call it bass guitar test bounce. Going to the desktop, so I'm going to export that, and then I'll bring it back into this session, and it should be exactly the same length as the guide track. Okay, so I'll make a new track. I'll go to my desktop and drag in the bass guitar that I've just bounced. Okay, I'll zoom back out a bit. So now I know that it starts at the very start of the session. Oops. And if I just move that up, you can see now that that's exactly the same length. I can unwarp it because I don't want it to be warped. I can't drag it out, like it's not any longer than it needs to be. It starts at exactly the same point because we selected the guide track as the reference for how long we wanted the WAV file to be. Okay, and so now you can see it's actually cut off the end there because the bass actually keeps going. So that's not necessarily ideal. I would have edited the bass properly to do that. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be if you know that the file that you're working to, the guide track, is a specific length. You could use the loop switch locators. So you can turn it on if you don't have to turn it on, but you can actually just like select those brackets up the top there and drag these start and stop parts. So that'll go from the very start right up to here. Now this is where it's probably you have to zoom in to get it right on. Whoops. There. And we know that that doesn't go any further. So that would, and if I select that so that that top bar is black now, then that's the export range. So that's essentially the same thing as doing this and just selecting the wave. I can do this. Two different ways of getting the same result there. Now, for example, if I wanted to, I'd recorded something, the bass guitar, perhaps I'd only recorded a section of it that, I'm going to get rid of this bounce I just did. Perhaps I liked the, say, the second verse, right? So I'm like, I did the whole take, but actually it was really only the second verse that was really good. That's the only part that I want to share and send with everyone. The other parts I'll work on later and fix them. So it's all to a click and it's all a set length. So I know I can actually go, well, what I could do is go, here is verse 2, 16 bars. What I could do is select, here is the bass part that I like. So what I can do is I can select that area like that, press Command E. And now what that does is that sort of chops that area so it's its own little clip. Now, the thing about that is I just want to hear that part. I actually don't like what I did here, and I don't like what happened afterwards. So what I want to do is share that part there, the verse 2, 16 bars section. But I want it to sync up with everyone else's files. So the way I'm going to do that is kind of exactly the same. So I'm going to actually select that wave as the guide track, make sure it's been pulled out properly. Yes, it's in the right spots. There's nothing that's been, whoops, I'll move it just to check. Yep, okay, great. So that's all in the right spots. That's there. So I'm going to go highlight that as the export length. I'm going to just export the bass guitar track. I've got it solid anyway, but if I go here, so bass guitar track is what I want to export. Yes. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. And I'll call it test bounce 2. Actually, no, what I'll do is I'll call it, what was it? It was verse 2, 16 bars. Bass, verse 2. So bass guitar, verse 2 only. Okay. So I've got that. Now, what's happening is that it's going to export a WAV file that's exactly the same length as the guide track. There's going to be silence on either side of that though, which you might think is kind of a waste of space, potentially, a waste of file size. But the reason you do it is because if I go to that now and drag it in, you can see, yes, there's complete silence either side of that section, but because we exported it at the exact same length as the guide track, we can see that it is exactly the same length, which means we know it's going to be in sync. If, for example, I'd only selected it like this amount, let's see what happens if I do this. So that'll work perfectly. That'll sync up perfectly. So if I get rid of that, let's say I go back to here and I go, yep, I like that. That's the bit I like. I'm just going to select the bit I like that I've done. I've got it soloed. Going to export it. Yep, bass guitar. Verse 2 only. Okay, version 2, because we've got 2 of those now. And you'll notice that that didn't take very long to export. And the reason is because that is actually a much... Now, it's exactly the same file, but look, the problem is if you give this to someone else that you're collaborating with, yes, you've called it verse 2, but depending on, they might have their guide track slightly moved out of the way or something like that, and all of a sudden it's going to be really hard to place exactly, because they won't have that guide track there, that pink bass guitar track, that won't be visible to them. So they won't really know where to put this exactly, because it could be anywhere. It's like, oh, that doesn't stretch out any further. Does it go at the start? No, it's verse 2. Or where's verse 2? So there's a lot of guesswork that has to happen there. Whereas with the other way, it doesn't matter where the other person has their guide track. It's always the same length. So all you have to do is line up. I'll bring it back in. Verse 2 only. So if I do this again, let's get rid of that. Let's say I've moved this guide track around, which is a bit annoying, but what I can do, I know that it starts at that bar, and there we go, perfect, lined up again. So that's a really, really important thing when you're collaborating with people using stems across different DAWs, whether it's like Ableton, Logic, or Pro Tools, or other things. Always be exporting the exact same length to a specific reference track, whatever that is. Make sure you've all agreed on what that is. It could just be a length of time across a certain BPM, or it could be a certain sort of, drum file or guide track or something that you're all playing to. But make sure you all agree on that, and that you're all consistently exporting every single stem that you need to share, that it's always done in that way. That way there's no question about where things are meant to start. So hope that was helpful, and thanks for watching the video.